Before I start, I must preface that I have Asperger's syndrome, whether or not any return viewers of this channel may be aware. That said, the premise of a K-drama tackling the topic of autism with its protagonist, when many Asian countries aren't the most focused on handling the telltale signs or idiosyncrasies of the autistic, certainly drew me to Extraordinary Attorney Woo. It was how the series handled its main premise, its characters, and the themes woven into both though, that allowed it to be what I'd crown the best new television series of 2022, and the second best of what, admittedly limited, exposure I've had towards Korean television. This is the current ranking if interested. Getting the obvious out of the way first, the portrayal of autism within the series, both on its own and considering the setting, is very respectable. Though a bit more on the savant side that media tends to focus on, as popularised by Rain Man, rather than the more typical cases, Woo is a series that displays a balanced side of the condition with its titular protagonist. Woo can present the genius memory and critical thought upon select topics of law and cytology, but also displays common flaws those with autism can bring to social matters, such as hyperfocus on a topic alienating those wishing to bond with her, as well as difficulty in several motor skills. It also provides a varied look into the autism spectrum, through many different types of it which come with varying levels of strengths and weaknesses, from someone who is lacking in any social or work skills, to one relevant to the last two episodes of the season whose abilities are used for very nefarious purposes. Woo herself also has some level of introspection on her value when it comes to her imperfections, which generates much of the drama within the second half of the series. On the subject of relationships, the main romance within Woo is both unique for its demographic and well done in its premise. From what I have seen, many K-dramas with romance seem to have more idyllic or extreme cases of love between a good-looking couple. While the latter is true of Woo and Junho, the romance takes on an intentionally awkward form of difficulties, such as Woo's issues with kissing properly and her ideas for dates. Not only is it significantly more grounded than many romances in Korean media, but it also works the topic of autism well into certain tropes of the romance stories. One element common of poorly done romance stories is in characters taking far too long to admit their feelings for each other when in adulthood. Japanese anime is particularly guilty of this in cases of adult characters acting as shy or embarrassed towards admittance of their feelings as teenagers with no dating experience. With the severe nature of Woo's autism and Junho's desire to be delicate with her boundaries due to this, however, the slow nature of their relationship works surprisingly well compared to similarly paced relationships in fiction. This nature of managing certain ideas or tropes around autism also leads well into the next major point. One of the genius aspects of the series is how it uses the idea of autistic traits and issues within the wider narrative. Communication is an issue for Woo at times, and this lack of communication becomes a common theme with many character conflicts coming about through characters not responding with clarity in their intentions, despite the rest of those this concerns not being on the spectrum, be it through their own difficulties to see outside their worldview or the structure of Korea's society and etiquette. This is most notable with Kwon Min-woo's actions and thoughts of jealousy and insecurity, which come about from not opening up to Woo or many others fully about how he feels, and it's no thematic surprise that his turn point to become far more of a team player and friend to his peers is during and after the trip to Jeju that acts as a bonding experience for the main characters. Speaking of issues within Korea's society, each of the cases revolve around an idea that either adds to social issues, feeds into thoughts of the characters, or become overarching topics for the series. Several instances of judges being influenced by obscure familial or alumni links brings up points of nepotism that tie into the more overarching thread of Tae-soo-mi's ties to Woo. The tragedy of Kim Gong-goo's daughter rebelling against his traditionalist and authoritarian attitudes primarily due to the tight grip he placed on her, tying into later reveals such as how Jun's wife left him for how much focus he placed on his work. The same can be said of the case of a North Korean defector wishing to be with her daughter, having Woo in respect on having grown up without a mother, or the ATM case inspiring her to become a more morally righteous attorney. I must also add to this point of social critique within the series that, despite the narrative of the series tend to side more with liberal attitudes of social issues, the different sides of socio-political cases are given a very balanced viewpoint with both sides. A prime example of this is in the episode involving the company's policy of having one of the spouses in a married couple resign if both work there. Though the focus is on it supposedly being a tactic to remove women from the workplace, the defendants state the obvious in that it wasn't exclusive to only the wives, as well as the natural ease it would add to familial roles, with more wives having time for childcare. This also extends to the characters and the overarching premise of Oo's autism. As I've already mentioned, Oo's idiosyncrasies can cause issues such as her doubts in continuing a relationship with Jun-Ho, as well as taking a long time to articulate the reason of her own self-doubts to someone who had been absolutely supportive and nurturing towards the relationship. Though we can understand Oo's reasons behind such doubts, it's very difficult to say she handled the conflict well at all, which helps show her as a flawed character. Meanwhile, Kwan can be a character who is easy to despise at times for his underhanded methods and mistreatment of Uyeon-woo, but is far from a one-dimensional opposition with his fears of losing his job due to the competitive nature of Hanbada, combined with the pressure of having to support his aging parents. Almost all the characters in the series have complex and grounded motivations to be both believable and engaging to the audience in a very balanced manner. The exception being Chan, who's pretty laughably egotistical and petty. I'm not even sure how he managed to climb up the ranks at Hanbada when he's so incompetent at many aspects of law. This is a breath of fresh air when compared to modern Western entertainment, wherein complex characterization and/or balanced political viewpoints are less than a handful per year, and is far more saturated with poorly done recycled propaganda that has nothing new to social commentary, with one-dimensional mouthpieces rather than three-dimensional characters. This can also be specifically seen in modern female characters, in which many of them in the West serve purely as factory-produced displays of third-wave feminism, with little to them beyond the plot saying they're strong and capable, or ignoring their femininity entirely. I've only seen a handful of K-dramas, but each one has done a staggeringly better job at making their female characters complex and engaging ones, and their femininity playing a necessary role into deepening their characterization, than at least 90% of Western fiction in the last decade. In other words, reject Western modernity, embrace Eastern quality. The series isn't perfect though. I've already mentioned Chan being the weakest character, and he's not the only issue. The episode involving husbands or wives having to resign from a company is honestly the weakest one due to its case not tying strongly into the wider narrative or deepening the development or growth of its cast, at least not until the now confirmed season 2 comes out. The visual cue of Oo also seeing cetaceans each time she has an epiphany on a court case is also somewhat odd. It's a nice stylistic element, is also more than that with Oo noting seeing them in her mind on one occasion, and the collection of different whales and dolphins in the last episode makes for an excellent stylistic way of showing each of the cases having accumulated in her experience and the sense of fulfillment. Of course, it's difficult to see this as immersive when seeing such visual experiences is far from an autistic trait, at least in my experience. Still, one poorly handled character, its weakest episode still having interesting social exploration, and the whale segment being a very minor point, goes to show how extraordinary the series is, if these are the biggest critiques I can give it. I guess one could bring up how many of the cases are fairly episodic in terms of plot continuity, though the impact they have on characters going forward, and this affirming the show to be a character-driven work, makes this in no way an issue. I will say there's an issue in Netflix's localization with the subtitles though, as scenes in which characters say 911 in reference to emergencies is just really bad. I mean, I live in the country where that is not the emergency services number, so doing so for a Korean series is just stupid. Netflix. To summarise, Extraordinary Attorney Woo does an excellent job crafting its characters, giving balanced viewpoints on topics covered, and tastefully exploring the ideas of autism within Asia and in general, to a great enough degree to be a brilliant work of art. Though I'm hesitant towards its second season with how much catharsis there was to the character arcs of its season finale, I do hope it lives up to the same standard, and would recommend this to anyone who has, or is close to anyone on the autistic spectrum, or anyone simply wishing to see a well-done character-driven court drama.